Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1907. You have with you here today two of your favorite FDH Lounge dignitaries, Rick Morris and Ben Chu. Ben being our NBA chief hoops analyst, here to talk about the first half of the 2025-26 NBA season and beyond. It's our stretch run preview show for this NBA season. So taking a look at everything that's happened, how the standings are at this point, things we expected and didn't expect, what do I expect coming down the stretch, anything that came out of the All-Star break here. And certainly one of the big topics, especially in the last week, one of the big topics du jour has been tanking. I have some thoughts on that, and I have a solution that I'm willing to put out there. All that and much, much more as we bring in my good pal, Ben Chu. Ben, great to have you on again today, buddy. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate being on as always, Rick. So
great to have you here. And in looking at the way that the season has broken out thus far, I guess I'll lead with this from Basketball Reference. Looking at this, if I was to tell you that the two teams that are essentially the New England Patriots of the NBA vis-a-vis strength of schedule thus far, Detroit 1, Boston 2. Would that surprise you based on the way they've played the first half?
No, not really. I also think on top of that too, Rick, the Eastern Conference it's a little more competitive than in other years, but there's still a very top heaviness to the conference right now. And it's just logical because obviously the Eastern Conference, you're going to play a little bit more worser teams early on in the season. And the West is just always going to be brutal just based on the power balance of superstars in the conference.
Absolutely. And looking at this again, if there is a big surprise team in the NBA this year, it has been Detroit. And we've talked about this before, largely in the context of my Cleveland Cavaliers over a period of time here, is that he is a coach that is great as a turnaround coach and has sort of gotten the rep of being the Marty Schottenheimer of the NBA, that he can get you to the doorstep. Can he get you the rest of the way there? We're about to find out based on how things go the second half of the season. But I got to say, in looking at this, in Detroit, they've played very, very, very well. But I've compared this off air to you as far as like whether it be a Denver Broncos team trying to win a Super Bowl with Bo Nix, the whole thing of like, our quarterback is good enough to like, he's not going to win us a Super Bowl, but he's not going to lose it for us. The equivalent to that to me in the NBA is like, our 3-point shooting is like, okay, I don't know how special it is, but it's okay. So Detroit, I don't think this year has even made that threshold as far as like, okay, 3-point shooting. It's better in some places than it has been. But then you've seen a guy like their megastar, even Cade, having a little bit of regression in that regard from time to time here. So I know that you and I, from talking to you off air, that's the big question that we still have for them, is that what are they going to be doing? I mean, short term, they are what they are. But medium term, at the very least, what are they going to do to try to address that going forward? Because that's clearly the biggest thing holding them back.
Right. Currently, as you know, too, Rick, they're in the bottom half in the league in 3-point percentage. Obviously, they traded for Kevin Huerter from Chicago. He's not having his best shooting season. He's shooting about 34-35%. So they kind of bought low on Kevin Huerter, and we'll see if they'll be able to do that. The real question, again, is like the reason why they've been so successful this season is they are the top, points in the paint team in the league right now.
Yes.
They're scoring 70% of their points in the paint, and it gets to the point where they're just bullying other teams, and it's turning more a little bit back into the old school bad boys Pistons just a little bit. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they react, because it seems like unless Cade gets injured or a massive injury occurs throughout the roster, that they're going to have the overall number 1 seed.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very intriguing to see with, they'll probably have an easy time in the first round, but they're going to have to go through a playoff field that is pretty good for the Eastern Conference in many years.
It is. And in looking at this, again, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along here, but as I had indicated to you off air, for reasons both of sentimentality and also long-term greed, wanting to keep this nucleus together, I was not among the people doing jumping jacks with the whole blockbuster Garland-Harden deal, which is clearly showstopper deal of the first half of the season here. Nevertheless, thus far, the way it's playing out, you can't look at it and say anything other than in the short term, it is a grand slam for the Cavs. And I may have perhaps underestimated the degree to which that's the case. But looking at this here, like, I don't think it's a great chance, but I think it's a non-zero chance that the Cavs actually can run down Detroit for the number 1 seed. The Cavs have got a relatively soft schedule the rest of the way here. They've got some big marquee games where we will see how they stack up, but I'm going to say a non-zero chance. I don't think it's a great chance that Detroit gives up the number 1 seed, and the Cavs are clearly the only team that can do it if anybody's going to. The way that the Knicks are going on their present trajectory, it ain't going to happen. Nobody else is going to do it.
I'm going to at least use the rule that I feel like, at least if it's a Knicks Pistons matchup, they are going to both have to be, the Knicks are going to have to be fully healthy, because in both those games this season, they have not been.
Mm-hmm.
I think Boston's going to be interesting. I know there's rumors that Tatum may be coming back at the tail end of this season. Still nothing official at the moment. But I feel like Cleveland is probably in that weird sort of they're going to finish probably either 3rd or 4th overall, and that would, in most cases, mean they would probably meet them in the conference semifinals or the conference finals. So it's going to be very interesting to see, because there's always been the knock on James Harden that when he goes into the playoffs, outside of that one really great run that he hasn't been as good. But again, I feel like that's also selective memory from a lot of people. So we'll see. I think the real question too with Detroit is, and it's just been like recent NBA history over the last 10 to 15 years. It's very rare for a team to go from essentially worst to first, and in their big jump, there always seems to be a stumbling block for whatever reason. We saw it with OKC a couple years ago. We also saw it with I know there was that time with Golden State as well when their dynasty was just starting. So they were getting into that scenario. And I think, like you noted too, Rick, the big question is, if Detroit can't hit threes, some of these teams like Boston, like Cleveland, who do shoot well from three, that's going to be problematic for them in a 7-game series.
Another analogy here, cross sport. I love cross sport analogies. Detroit doing what they're doing with scoring in the point as much as they are. That reminds me of the whole thing of the Chicago Bear defense making it through the regular season being so dependent on turnovers, which is something that, again, you can't count on that manifesting itself in the playoffs. I look at that Bear defense and I see Detroit in that also too, that again, the way that the rest of the league is trying to do and trying to win this with the pace and space and everything like that, Detroit trying to buck the system in that regard, I just don't like their odds with this manifestation of what they have. We'll see what they come back with next year, what lessons they learn, what flexibility they can make. They're ahead of, and I would say this in their defense organizationally, they're ahead of, much like teams like New England in the NFL this year, they're ahead of where they thought they would be. Again, New England also partially dependent on schedule. Jacksonville, I think, was a little bit ahead of schedule on their turnaround. So Detroit wasn't necessarily built for this moment, in fairness to them. But they're going to have to learn from this and adjust going into next year. And it's weird that we're saying this about a team that's the number one seed, where, again, I'm pretty much writing them off. I know you're not. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that's the whole thing of it here, too. They're the number one seed because of these situational things that they've been able to exploit in the regular season that they may not be able to exploit in the playoffs.
I also think, Rick, the big issue for them moving forward is that we've seen teams rack up wins in the regular season against inferior opponents, and a playoff series against a really good team is a completely different story. And again, we'll see, because if there was a team to buck the system at this point, Detroit does make logical sense. And again, there's always the scenario too that their 3-point shooting can improve over the rest of the second half of the season, because it pretty much just has to, because they don't stand a chance against some of these other teams in the East who are more dependent on 3-point shooting.
I think it will to some degree. And I have to say, circling back to the Cavs for a second here, that, again, as much as I just absolutely loathe media narratives of any kind, one place that I have found to be over a period of time sort of a safe haven from that, whenever I'm in my car, if I have on an affiliate of the VSiN Sports Network, I always sort of regard them as kind of like the CNBC of sports talk, where they're just kind of breaking it down. But shockingly, I was listening this morning. There was a guy that was like, he was talking about betting odds with the playoffs and getting into like narratives of James Harden. It's like, I don't know, he's not known for getting it done in the playoffs, and just kind of on that, which, as you said, wasn't the case, at least that one run. Isn't necessarily reflective of the way that he played in Brooklyn. I know they didn't get to make deep playoff runs when he was there, but it's a thing where the circumstance that he has with the Cavs, you always have to look at the specific circumstances in sports and in life. And this is a thing where, look, if his shot's not falling on any given night, if he's having a brutal shooting night, I fully expect to see 10 to 12 assists out of the guy, and perhaps at a minimum, because he's a guy, and we've seen that in this town before. One of the big things that LeBron was judged for in Cleveland was his ability to elevate the other players on the team. You look at the supporting cast that he dragged to the NBA Finals in 2007 and in 2018. Not enough to get him over the hump, but that's not reasonable based on that. Just getting that far. And we've seen it thus far with Harden. We've seen what we would call in Cleveland the LeBron effect with like Jared Allen. Like, he looks like a completely different guy at this point. You just think to yourself, what could he possibly do with Evan Mobley when he comes back? And the ability to hit Sam Merrill in the corner and Tyson, who's having a career year shooting, and all these different things here. James Harden is going to be he's going to be judged based far more on the number of points that he puts up per game. It's going to be based probably even more so on his ability to elevate everybody around him. And thus far, that's been nothing but a grand slam, albeit in a very short sample size.
And I think the big question for Cleveland at this point is going to be how that playoff rotation kind of settles down, because they have at least 10 or 11 guys who could be playing. And one of the questions I think last year Kenny Atkinson had the field was, during that Pacers series, they didn't really use the bench as much as they did during the regular season. So it's going to be a very intriguing scenario to see, because I think because Detroit is so far ahead of everyone right now in the Eastern Conference that I don't think Cleveland, Boston, or New York is going to chase them down. So you're really looking at the Cavs being within that 2 to 5 seed margin. So it's going to be an interesting path. And I think one of the big things, at least for Detroit, is that if the chips fall where they may, they can easily get to a conference finals where they won't have to face a really good 3-point shooting team. Mm-hmm. But at some point, judging how everything is going, it feels like they're either going to have to play Boston or Cleveland at some point in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's going to be very difficult. Now, again, teams that have surprised in the East, Boston with Jaylen Brown, you see what happens when he has to be the alpha dog. He's risen to the occasion and been an MVP candidate. But Boston just playing that same system and remarkably getting about the same degree of shooting that they were getting when some of the star players they shipped out or have had to be injured were there. Philadelphia has been lifted to where they're at in large part by VJ Edgecombe. Of course, Maxey as well. You can't leave him out of the mix. But Edgecombe and then Knuppel down in Carolina, what's happening there in Charlotte. Conk Knuppel is just really having an amazing kind of year. Either of these two guys in a normal year could have been Rookie of the Year. It's going to be Cooper Flagg because he's been everything that he should be and then some, and we'll get to that with the West. But the story of the influx of some of the great young players in the NBA coming in and already affecting the Eastern Conference playoff picture, not at the top really, but in the middle part and at the bottom, these rookies have been very impactful already.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, at this pace, it looks like the first 3 picks of that draft are all going to turn into future All-Stars at this point. So it feels like, this was one of those, it's what we thought when we were doing the draft coverage, is that the top, it was very top heavy, but it's going to be really interesting. And again, Philly is a dark horse at this point, because if everyone is healthy, they are a very tough team. And we'll see with the resurgence of Charlotte. I know Milwaukee is still hovering around that area after getting Cam Thomas on the free agency market the buyout market, I guess, at that point. Mm-hmm. But it would feel more like the Charlotte story has been incredible. I mean, their month of January, they were destroying teams. Mm-hmm. It was like they led the margin of victory. It was ridiculous. I think it was like 12.8. That means you're beating teams by double digits. And the big thing for me was always is that Charles Lee was a really good assistant coach in Boston. And it strikes me that I think he now has the team around him in Charlotte, and the talent is there. And if LaMelo and the rest of them can stay healthy, they are a legitimate threat, because you don't go on a run of like winning 8 straight games by a margin of 10 plus and not be a threat in the playoffs.
Yeah. And they've already, again, when you look at teams with their future big threes, they've already got 2 of them. They've already got, obviously, Knuppel and then Brandon Miller. And then it's just a matter of what they can continue to put around them. But yeah, when you're looking at the rest of the conference here, you mentioned Milwaukee. They've been kind of floundering with Giannis's injury situation and all the questions that have been arising around that. The biggest underachiever by far that we have seen in this mix here, it's been a little bit with Orlando, although injuries have had something to do with that. But Atlanta, man, for a team that I picked to be in the Eastern Conference Finals, I'm looking really, really, really silly. Or maybe I picked Orlando. I don't remember which, but I picked one of them for the semis and one for the conference finals. And Atlanta especially is making me look to be very, very silly. I think they did the right thing in offloading Trae Young, because I don't think he's a fit with the rest of the core here. And I think that they're more coherent moving forward as a team, where it's Jalen Johnson's team now and the other athletic guys around him. And it's just a matter of, can enough of these guys improve their shooting from distance a little bit more? Because that's a scenario where Atlanta rises up and becomes a true, not just power, but superpower in the NBA if any of these young guys can spread the floor effectively.
Right, and we saw at points during the year that Nickeil Alexander-Walker played really well. I know Risa Shea is still struggling a little bit at the beginning of his career, but we all forget he's only 20 years old. So
yeah,
it's kind of hard to be hard on a 20-year-old, overall in a case like that. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those weird scenarios, Rick, where they were a dark horse favorite coming into the season. Trae gets hurt. They essentially give the keys to Jalen Johnson. They play really well, which allows them to trade Trae Young, and then essentially they decide to offload Porzingis as well to get Kuminga from Golden State. So it's a very interesting to see what they'll do. Obviously, they still have New Orleans' unprotected pick, and depending on where that lands, they could be getting another potential superstar in return. So I don't. This is. I feel like what essentially Boston and Atlanta flipped in this situation. Boston was supposed to be the team to take the gap year. But they're number 2 in the East, and now Atlanta is taking the gap year, essentially.
That's a great point. And I would like to, you just went in the weeds there. I'd like to stay in the weeds for a second. And that is, when I look at Kuminga in Atlanta, is that the mirror image of the bad situation that he was in Golden State? Because it was a thing where, again, he never became quite the floor spacer that Steve Kerr and company were wanting him to become in Golden State, versus he goes to a team like Atlanta. And I'm looking at this like, is he in the mix with too many other young guys who are too much like him at this point in time? I don't know. It seems like a weird spot for him to have gone to, like better than where he was in Golden State, where he was buried, because he really didn't fit into Golden State's, I think, kind of laughable attempts at a win now kind of a situation. But in Atlanta, I don't know. Is he in a situation where it's going to be hard to kind of stick out based on some of the other young players with similar skill sets?
I would tend to agree with that statement. It's also very public that Kuminga wasn't exactly excited to go to Atlanta. Well,
yeah, I wonder why, right?
And I'm like, and again, like, I foresee, again, he still hasn't played for them yet, so we're going to have to wait and see how that works out for them. But again, it would not shock me if Atlanta essentially did this deal to offload Porzingis' contract, and then worst case scenario, then you have a tradable asset at some point in the future. So, but again, I don't think this deal was really made to, for on the Golden State side. I feel like this deal was made just to, have a punter's chance at potentially making a run in the playoffs, and then worst case scenario, you can run it back next year with Butler and, Steph and Draymond and Porzingis and see what happens. Because the one thing that we have to note, when Golden State is at their best, It's when they have a big man who can either be incredibly defensive or they can get easy points. And I think we all know Kristaps Porzingis can get easy baskets.
He absolutely can. There's no question about that. And that when you look at the Western Conference, where there's not a lot of surprises, I think there, from my last word on the Eastern Conference for right now is that there have been surprises in as much as, again, and for me as a Cavs fan, I complained last year, especially in retrospect, that our luck was too sublime through the regular season. And then we get these injuries and things going wrong in the playoffs. This year, one of the surprises in the Eastern Conference is just that, the degree of everything that fell upon the Cavs put them in a down and out situation, at least relative to what the national media was saying for much of the first half. You and I kept our wits about us, and you're seeing now with the turnaround that they're having, and that's post Harden trade, although I think some of it started before that. But the Cavs being a little bit kind of down and out for a period of there relative to expectations was a little bit of a surprise. Boston and Detroit are surprises, as we've talked about. The Western Conference at the top seems to be bereft of them. And I would say including San Antonio, because I think we talked about this on the preview coming into the year, is that this is the new tradition in the NBA, is that I think last year it was Houston that was rising up, that people didn't expect to be this good this soon. The year before it was Oklahoma City. If there's a talented young team, they're going to take a major step this year. And nobody looked like they were going to be more ready to do that than San Antonio, and that's exactly what they've done. They're in the mix. Denver, Houston, they've had some issues from time to time, but they've really, and again, my guy, Reed Shepherd, who, again, I said should have been the first pick in the draft the year that he came on, a guy that I have a soft spot in my heart for because he reminds me of one of my all-time favorite players, Mark Price. He has really stepped into a tough situation there after Van Vliet goes down. They were smart to turn the keys over to him there. And again, so Houston is up there. The Lakers are still kind of clinging to the fringes of it here at this point. Minnesota, they've been interesting. They're always looking to make moves, and they did at the deadline. So, but when you look at the West writ large, Oklahoma City on top and the rest of these top teams just kind of circling them, there's nothing I see there that's nearly as surprising to me as some of the stories in the Eastern Conference, Ben. And I think that's largely because we knew coming into the season, Eastern Conference going to be more wide open once you get past the top team or two or potentially three. The Western Conference, we knew it was pretty much locked and loaded at the top. You've probably got to go down to Portland at the 9 seed to find somebody that's even a borderline kind of a surprise. Or actually, yeah. I would say Phoenix at the 7. Phoenix at the 7. Too.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the one at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they've also, because Booker has been injured for the last couple of weeks, that has impacted their seeding as well. And then obviously, I think one of the other surprises that the Clippers struggled that badly out of the gate, but they're now hovering in the play-in tournament. Kawhi's been playing really well, so it's not surprising. But I tend to agree. I think we all kind of knew that San Antonio was going to be good. I watched a fair amount of them in the preseason. They just looked incredible at periods of time. So it's not surprising that they all have an opportunity to challenge OKC. And again, it's going to be really interesting to see how OKC navigates the rest of the second half with Shea's injury and then also dealing with injuries to their depth, because the one thing that was really great about OKC last season was they stayed relatively healthy through most of the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they were allowed to play together. And I mean, their current starting lineup hasn't shared the floor for more than 200 minutes during the regular season. So It's going to be interesting to see how they kind of navigate the rest of the way in the regular season and going into the playoffs.
That's right. And when you look at the West, really the two surprise teams, in the playoff contention with Phoenix at 7, Portland at 9, the commonality there, where did this come from kind of a thing with Dillon Brooks with the Suns, and then with the Blazers, Denny Avdija. And we talked about this before with you just happened to touch on this with Atlanta, with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. This is a weird year in the NBA for where did this come from? I'm going to ask you a question for which it's not fair for me to expect you to have a real answer to this, because I don't know that anybody necessarily would, but any kind of common threads here or anything that when we see guys like this taking this kind of leap offensively at this stage of their career that we didn't really see coming, what are your thoughts about that? And be as broad with that as you want to be, because I know it's a tough question.
I mean, for me, overall, I think it's just different situations create different things. Like essentially for Denny Avila, his whole thing was essentially Dame got traded.
Mm-hmm.
He got more time at the point because Scoot Henderson was dealing with injury. So he was allowed to kind of become that point forward type guy. And you saw sprinkles of that when he was with the Wizards, but they usually pretty much just played him on the perimeter and forced him to take a bunch of jump shots. For Phoenix, I'm not super surprised because, again, another team I watched in the preseason a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They just have this sort of, Jordan Ott, who came from the Cavs. He has a free-flowing style of offense, and they have a fair amount of good shooting around them and good defense. Like Ryan Dunn is still, in my opinion, probably the most underrated player in the league right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you still got guys like they got Colin Gillespie from the Nuggets. He's been playing exceptionally well this year too, and they got Grayson Allen. So I don't really think either of those teams are going to make big runs in the playoffs, but these are teams that feels like they can continue to keep building, and they can make a legitimate case to be in the top 5 of the West next season.
I think so, yeah, the way that they're going. And again, you and I have been talking about this really since especially 2020, when you had Denver and Miami that both were in the Final Four of the playoffs in the NBA. This whole thing of player development and the organizations that have been the strongest at it. The Heat have been, the Nuggets have been. They ended up meeting in 2023 for the NBA title, and Denver won. Subsequently, that's been the case with the Cavs, with a lot of the guys that they've gotten under the radar. Sam Merrill is one of the most valuable 6-man type players you're going to find in the league with his shooting that he has. So what they're doing in Phoenix there, and again, Jordan not coming out of that system. And again, Jordi Fernandez in Brooklyn, like, we're not seeing the results on the court yet. But it is a thing where, I laughed about this last year that, like, sometimes you have too high of a floor when you have a really good young developmental coach. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be winning these games here. And him being a guy that came out of the Denver system and the Cleveland system as well. So you see commonalities here with these coaching trees. And Jordan Ott, as much as I sort of like half joked about it at the time, that, like, Ishiba probably didn't care about anything other than taking away a valuable assistant coach from Dan Gilbert. Whatever his motivations were, it has certainly paid off with what they're left with this year. And
I think one of the big things too is that it feels like, again, when KD was there, that was a great team too. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that when Durant's singular game, he's a focal point on offense. So when you're allowed to go back to just Devin Booker spreading the court and letting some of these other players get some additional run, they're going to have an opportunity to make some noise, because let us not forget, if they did not have a good start to the season, there was a lot of discussion that Booker may be traded at some point. Yeah. Now that looks like an impossibility. So it feels like everything that, Yeshiva's been doing recently has been working, and it feels like he may be putting a little bit of an imprint on this team now. And he said it out publicly in multiple interviews that while he was there, he took the big swing to get Durant, and then he was just getting to understand the rest overall. Yeah. And I feel like that's definitely a thing we have to consider, because just like rookies go through their own growing pains, if you're a brand new owner, of course you're going to have to go through these growing pains as well.
Well, and I will say, as much as it might pain him and Dan Gilbert to admit it, he's kind of following in Dan Gilbert's footsteps in that regard. Both in 2010 and then in 2018, both times LeBron left, Gilbert was like, okay, let's try and keep it going here. And I'm sitting here screaming, like, as a fan, like, no, tear it down, trust the process. And the Cavs only got good again, especially the second time. They really didn't the first time till LeBron came back. They got good again the second time because they were horrible. They bottomed out, and I wanted them to bottom out early, which they relatively kind of did, and came back earlier than anybody thought. And that's the lesson right there, is that, like, you have to get out of this mentality of, like, we have to try to win now, because if you're unrealistic about it, for the most part, and we'll get into this in a moment here about the draft process here, but that's the reason everybody tanks, because it is the way that the incentives are right now. Trust the process. You have to bottom out. Phoenix didn't quite bottom out with what they're doing. They're able to kind of retool on the fly. But as far as to get anybody to sort of help them in this next incarnation of where they're at. I have a feeling that I might get a violent objection from FDH Lounge dignitary Derek Allen, who was a lifelong Suns fan. But I mean, if I were them, I'd flip Booker. I know you're saying that it's impossible the way that they are now, and we're past the trade deadline, so you don't have to worry about sabotaging a playoff team. But you and I always talk about timelines, and like his timeline doesn't coincide with the future of that franchise and when they're going to be a true championship contender, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't fully disagree. But again, we also have to remember too, Devin Booker is still relatively young as well.
Sure.
I think this is it's this weird narrative, and we see teams in the league go on this too. Is like they keep their stars for a little bit too long and don't get enough assets in the meantime. But
right,
I feel like this is one of those scenarios where like Phoenix is having its cake at this period of time. They want to see what happens. And let's just be honest too, if the way they play, it's a very attractive team for free agents in the offseason. The only problem is that the free agency class this year is not exactly great. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they continuously build. And they'll still be an interesting team in the West, because I do think at some point we're going to see one of the top 4 or top 5 currently fall back a little bit, whether it be the Lakers, whether it be OKC, whether it be somebody. Yeah, that's what it just feels like. Like we see it's very cyclical with the league, where you can go on a nice 2 or 3 year run, but then you're going to take a step back.
Yes. And if there is one team, one player, one situation that is super relevant right now, despite not being in any of this playoff talk that we are getting into, it would be the Dallas Mavericks. And we talked about this at like the 2025 calendar year is one of the strangest major sports years that any league ever had, all the way through with all the stories. And it all started the morning of February 1st with the shocking Luka trade. And I wake up to the text from you like, hey, should we do a podcast, emergency podcast on this Luka AD trade? Like, Luka AD trade? I mean, I'll never get sick of that story. But like, it started there and it went and it just unraveled completely for Dallas. Now they've moved on from AD, which again, no offense to him, but they were best off doing because of the bad taste of the trade, which had nothing to do with him personally, but that gets him out of the way. You get whatever back for him, and you weren't going to get a heck of a lot with his injury situation. But most of all, Cooper Flagg being the guy that you're building around at this point. It was funny. I was reading some very laudatory things that Kyrie Irving was saying about him today, and it's like, does anybody have a stranger career arc than Kyrie Irving, as far as like, I can't remember a guy who ever sidekicked 3 megastars before: LeBron, Luka, and Cooper Flagg. Like, that would be an interesting trivia question, right? Like, go find me somebody else who sidekicked 3 of these guys. And he wasn't overtly comparing Cooper Flagg to them, but he was saying, this is a kid that can do it all. He's truly exciting and amazing. And that's the thing here too, is that Dallas isn't going to be the team in the West that we're looking at next year. Like, this is the year Dallas takes a leap up. No, they're still going to have to build around him, get more pieces. Getting Kyrie back next year will help with that. But we are looking at a situation here, geographically at least. I know that Oklahoma City, oddly enough, is still in the Northwest Division, but you're going to have a situation here of like Oklahoma, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas. This whole thing being an axis of power for the league for years to come once Dallas gets there.
Right, and it's going to take them a little bit of time. And we'll see what they do with Kyrie in the offseason, if they want to potentially get more assets back for him, or if they want to let it, right? Because, again, one of the issues we did see was when they attempted to put Cooper Flagg at the point, wasn't exactly super successful. So it's going to be an interesting decision timeline for Dallas, and especially right now, too. They still do not have an official GM. That's right now Michael Finley and one of their other executives right now just essentially working together at this point. So it's going to be interesting too. And then obviously there's a whole Mark Cuban of it all. And then we'll see regarding the arena and the casino and all these other things with Dallas. But ultimately, they're a team that will be on the rise in the future. And it's clear that Flagg, we all knew he was a generational player. This was not shocking to anyone.
Right.
And to me, it just became apparent. Like, he became one of the youngest players ever to score over 40 in a game, which is ridiculous when you're, a 19-year-old playing in an NBA game and you drop 40 on a team. And it's just, he's an incredible player. They have some pieces. I mean, I know everyone poo-poos the AD trade, but Max Christie has been one of the top 3-point shooters in the league so far this year. They also have some other interesting pieces like Derek Lively, if he can stay healthy. You also have, Mohamed Cisse, who's a really underrated rebounder for them. And then you also have to talk about Klay Thompson and what his future with the team is. And they got Ryan Nebhart has filled in admirably just because literally no one else was able to play point guard in Dallas outside of him. But it's a very interesting sort of, like you said, with that time with those 4 teams all being competitive. Like, I'm going to be very shocked if we don't see a top 4 of them in the near future.
That would be amazing, and I think it's going to happen. One of the maybe 2 years from now, it's going to happen. I think at some point it's almost inevitable. And a name that you mentioned there, this is a name that I hear about from time to time. The great Dallas area sports and comedy podcast, The Dumb Zone. Jake Kemp has said on that show previously that he thinks Derek Lively has some offensive upside that may still yet come at this point in time. And you're talking about I think a poor man's version of what the Cavs are looking at with Evan Mobley, but a guy who can bring everything that Lively can bring on the defensive side of the ball. Man, if that guy can shoot even a little bit better, as he goes along, you're talking about a guy that could be part of a big 3 subsequently with Cooper Flagg. The development of Derek Lively, I agree with Jake on what he has said, that's going to be one of the most important things for that franchise in the years to come.
And I feel like too, they're going to get pieces because we've seen this before in prior generations with LeBron, and we saw it with Jordan. And not with Jordan necessarily, but we saw it also with Shaq and Kobe too. That once a generational talent starts to rise, free agents will flock to the area because this is an opportunity for them to be on a championship team or at least have a opportunity to be competitive. And we'll start to see, because I'm going to go on record and say this, this draft lottery will probably be the most important draft lottery outside of maybe the Ewing 85 draft lottery.
Wow.
Depending on how it plays out at the top, you have 3 sort of guys being deemed as can't miss players. That can change the fortune of a lot of these teams at this period of time.
It absolutely can. And I'm going to get to thoughts on the draft and the lottery in a second here on this whole tanking thing. But just writ large for the season, it is kind of funny that for some of the things that have been unexpected going into the season and everything, what I would have said this time a year ago, as far as my prediction for the finals, would have been Thunder versus Cavs, and Thunder over Cavs, I would say. And that was my prediction going into the playoffs at that time. That was my prediction before the season. And for all the topsy-turvy stuff, especially that we've seen in the Eastern Conference, I find myself right back at this point. But with myself feeling like the Cavs might have more than a puncher's chance, perhaps, of getting it done, just because, again, everything with James Harden, everything is so up in the air at this point. It's still so speculative. Is he going to be a key to unlocking Evan Mobley even more so the way that we know that, somebody is capable of doing it at some point? So it's the Cavs are both greatly improved in the near term and also something of a mystery as far as how good they can be. But that being said, the champ is still the champ until proven otherwise, because again, you look at it last year, you and I had talked about this, that version of Oklahoma City in the playoffs, I hate to say this as somebody who's a fan of another top contending team, but that's probably the worst version of Oklahoma City we're going to see in the next couple of years. It's kind of and maybe to a minor extent, when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl this past year, they did it with such a young defense. I think Nick Emanwari is maybe the key to that whole defense, and he's a rookie. So it's if you're going up against Seattle, it's only going to get harder from here on in. And that's kind of the same thing with Oklahoma City also, too. I think they're the favorite until proven otherwise. I don't think that it's impregnable in the Western Conference as far as Denver or somebody else taking them out. I don't think that it's impregnable as far as the Cavs taking them out, but I think the likeliest scenario at the end of the year is that Oklahoma City's holding the trophy again.
I feel like it is too. I think the real question for them is going to be how they handle this round of playoffs, because it will be significantly harder than last season. And right now, their biggest threat is clearly San Antonio, and San Antonio owns their regular season record at this point. So if OKC can avoid San Antonio, I feel like they're in good shape. But I would also make the argument at this time is that they've dealt with issues very similar to Denver has. They their core group of guys have not been healthy together this entire season.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to wonder it during the playoff run, does that impact? And we'll see how, all the decision making for them and then some of these other teams, because I think at one point earlier in the season, Rick, it became almost like OKC could go 74-8. This team's going to dominate everybody. And now all of a sudden it's kind of been like they're the favorite, but a prohibitive favorite, probably not anymore at this time.
No, I don't think they were. And again, it was an unsustainable pace at the beginning of the year.
Right.
It really
and another
was.
point, since you brought up the strength of schedule, they did not have a great strength of schedule. They were beating really bad teams at that point.
Yes, that's a very, very relevant thing to look at too, is what part of your schedule are you playing? And again, the whole cohesiveness of Oklahoma City, of getting everybody on the court at the same period of time. It's one of those things where it can work either way for you, as far as the legs will be fresher come playoff time, but is it potentially at the expense of cohesion versus, I think, where you'd want to be. And I have not said this about the Cavs for much of the season, of like, if you have to have this happen, at least have it happen the way that they have. No, the Cavs have been pretty cursed with a lot of things this year. But as far as like fresh legs for the playoffs, what's great for them is that it comes in the form of Max Strus, because it's not one of your core guys. All of a sudden, it's not Garland anymore. It's not like, oh, wait till we get Garland back. Garland's not a part of this anymore, for better or for worse. You have Harden, who's here and who's getting acclimated to everything. I think you'd much rather be in a position where if you're acclimating somebody, it's somebody who's a key piece of your rotation as opposed to a key part of your starting lineup or core of superstars.
Right, and I think that just logically makes sense as well. And again,
yep.
During points of the season, whatever lineup Oklahoma City has run out has won a lot of games regardless. So the one thing you can say in their favor is that their bench depth has been really good. Ajay Mitchell probably should be sixth man of the year if he played more games, played more minutes. But we went from OKC potentially setting a record to now they're still the favorite, but then now they also have to deal with San Antonio. They still have to deal with Denver. They have to deal with whoever comes out of the East if they make it to the finals. So it's a little bit different than what I think a lot of us were thinking at the start of the season. And we're seeing just a whole transition of how all these teams are working right now. We'll see. I am not as confident as I normally would say with what the finals matchup will be, because I feel like there's a handful of teams in both conferences that could make a run in the playoffs.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that it is kind of more up in the air than it was a year ago this time. And the irony is that, again, for all the certainty that it looked like in the Eastern Conference with the kind of season that the Cavs were having, again, the wheels came off in the playoffs. Indiana gets hot and is able to also take out they're able to, they're not having to deal with, I should say, Boston. That was not something that they were having to deal with, in part because you have the situation where JT goes down, but that was going to happen anyways, right? Like the one thing nobody talks about is I think that series was already over when right. Tatum goes down. But you look at it, and before we get to anything with my fix, I have a fix for tanking in the NBA. Before we get to that, I want to get to some of your thoughts in particular. Somebody who has watched more of the NBA across more of the broadcast outlets, first year of post Warner Media here. So you still have ESPN, ABC on the one side, but you now have on the other side, in place of TNT, you have NBC, you have Amazon Prime, you have Peacock. Your thoughts on the coverage that has taken place across these things? And of course, it ended up being the case with NBC and Peacock and All-Star Weekend as well.
Right. And I think the league is very happy with, I guess, how it played out now, because NBC has been a great shepherd, even though the All-Star Weekend, there was a lot of discussion in terms of attendance and the arena not looking full. But NBC's done a lot just to kind of bring back the pageantry, because we kind of, during the run of TNT, it was an incredible run and it was great people, but we also ran into this thing. It's like, it was, I don't want to say stale. I don't think that's the right word, but it felt like the same thing over and over again. And we're now seeing with Peacock, we're now seeing with Amazon Prime, a different sort of look, maybe a more cerebral look specifically for Amazon Prime with bringing in guys like Nash and Dirk and Udonis Haslem and Candace Parker, and just sort of a more look in terms of the league in a non-bias narrative. Because it got to the point where when we only had ESPN and we only had TNT, we literally had like, it was all just commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like for a lot of pure basketball fans, they kind of tuned out of that. And now we're starting to see it a little bit more of NBC and definitely with Prime Video that they're providing a different sort of more cerebral look at the game. And I think fans do actually want to know this stuff because we've seen it with stuff like Mind the Game with LeBron and Nash, and where in a lot of these other podcasts, like people actually want to learn about this stuff. People want to know more about why the Miami Heat are playing so well in a period of time of the season, or why, like LeBron may leave the Lakers or retire. Like I think as human beings, we enjoy punditry, but at the same point too, if that's all you have, you just run on empty. It's just not that interesting anymore. So I think for the league, it's been a good thing. And again, it got to the point where pretty much I think the league felt that ESPN and TNT was bad mouthing the game more than anything else. And you can kind of see that NBC and Prime Video have done and I think ESPN has pulled back a little bit too. It's more focusing on the game itself more instead of opinion.
Sure. And with
because
ESPN,
opinion's never going away, Rick, but
oh yeah. But with ESPN, and again, even if the executives aren't in place that blighted American television in the 21st century with embrace debate, I mean, that's what they are more than ever. And they're always going to be that, and it's going to bleed over into all of their non-sporting event programming. And sadly enough, some of their sporting event programming. But as far as the whole thing of the, like, people also want to be given something that's a little bit more in-depth and everything like that, I would like to think that, again, a segment like this, we're sort of exemplifying that, and that's one of the things that this show, since starting in 2007, has always tried to stand for, is that, again, people don't just want narratives and being spoon-fed that kind of crap. And you hear a lot of times, oh, that's what sells. I've never believed that, Ben. I've never believed that there's nearly as many people out there that want pablum as the ones who are watching the pablum.
Right, and I think one of the big things that the league, and I think the league also got to the point where the old guard run of ESPN and TNT had run its course. And again, still, we didn't lose inside the NBA, so that was always a positive. But I think also, too, we're starting to see kind of a seed shift of people being more like, I would rather watch Prime Video coverage than watch Charles Barkley and Kenny the Jet argue at each other over a salient point. So we're seeing, and especially also too with the big news from Netflix acquiring essentially the Ringer podcasts and a lot of these other podcasts, it's now it's a different world that we were living in. So now you have opportunities to look at other scenarios and other means of communication. And we've seen the NBA and the NFL has done this well, partnering with people like Michael McKelvey and Thinking Basketball to do videos to teach more about the game. Because I think if you just love the game of basketball, you always want to know more about it. So it feels like that we're in that sort of realm where we can now sort of watch a game and have it be a little different. And again, too, one of the big things I've always learned is that if people love content and they want to pursue that content, they will do it. And it's a lot better for the league to have positive content than to have analysts yelling and screaming at each other.
Absolutely, yes. Anytime that you get more of that and less of the shrieking debate stuff or clickbait, rage bait, whatever, that's always a good thing whenever that stuff can be put to the side as much as necessary. So for something substantive here, and I've been teasing this a bit. So, all right, my solution for ending tanking. So first of all, again, I don't think anybody at this point really likes the play-in tournament. It's a lot of the same teams every year, but it exists because it's a revenue source. Well, what if you could replace it with a bigger revenue source? So here's my idea. Scrap the play-in tournament. Top 8 makes the playoffs in both conferences. Saturday, Sunday, when you would start the playoffs, it's not the playoffs. you have an East triple header Saturday, West triple header Sunday, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. But basically, you play it out as a tournament for the teams that aren't in the playoffs here. And at the end, the winner gets the number one pick. This is how you change and you incentivize everything. Tiebreakers would be on strength of, or on point differential. So like the losers in the semifinals would be that. You could play it out. Saturday, Sunday would be the first round. Monday, Tuesday, the second round. Wednesday, Thursday, the third round. I'd still start the playoffs either Friday night or Saturday, Sunday. I'd play the playoffs like that. Monday night, the playoffs take a night off. It's the championship game for the lottery tournament. Winner gets the number one seed, loser gets the number two seed. I would bracket it by East and West. There's a case to be made for just going 1 to 14. I'm open on that one. I guess I could listen to other arguments on this, but it's a thing where, again, it's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen next year. And teams are going to say, we need time to adjust our rosters to the new incentives, by which they mean you were incentivizing us to tank now. You're not incentivizing us to tank anymore. But like, you won't have anybody doing the race for the bottom if that's the case. It'll be a thing where, again, everybody is going to be filling out their rosters with enough guys to plausibly try to make a run, if not at the playoffs, at least the middle echelon of what would be, you know, the lottery tournament. You're not going to want to be the one of the lowest seeds in there, because you're probably going to be out in the first round and end up getting a crappy draw. So that's my thought on how to do this at a point in time when they can implement this, and it would take at least a year or two. Whatever else anybody might have to say about this, they'd have to agree with me that it turns the incentives on their head. But your thoughts on this, about making it a race for the top instead of a race for the bottom in this way?
I mean, I think it could work. I think the problem is that it de-incentivizes a lot of these players to actually care. Because essentially, the only negative of that, and I'll say this honestly, is that I can totally see a scenario where a bunch of guys essentially may lose their jobs because they decide to win the lottery tournament. And I don't think the NBA players are going to be very happy about that.
Okay.
So I think these sort of newer ideas are kind of silly. I mean, ultimately, I think probably the simplest thing we can do in the short term is to remove pick protections from a certain angle. It should really just be a top 4 protection. That was the stuff that we've talked about before forever, and that's always existed. And then maybe I did see there was discussion of maybe instituting something that the Women's Hockey League, the PWHL, does, which it essentially you can either freeze the regular season at a certain point and then determine the lottery odds from there. Or another scenario you can do is you can just put sort of protections on the scenario of a team can't be in the lottery 3 years in a row or something like that. And again, the problem is that there's no perfect system here.
Yeah.
But I feel like too is that the big thing is that I think the easiest thing is they're just going to amend pick protections at the period of time, because let's be honest, when you do top 8, top 10, top 12, top 16, like, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, we can still have pick protections. Just keep everything top 4, because ultimately we've seen in the NBA, outside of like a few different anomalies, a lot of the picks in the lottery 6 to 14 usually have an okay to below average NBA career.
Right. That is true, generally speaking. Just a little bit of a devil's advocate to your objection on the system here. So if you're playing for a team like Washington, for example, is your biggest fear losing your job? Or is your biggest fear being in the biggest shite situation, one of the biggest ones you could be in professional sports for the foreseeable future? Like, tell me those guys aren't saying, just shoot me in the head. You know what I mean? Like, they're sick of being in that situation. Like, I think at least some of them might be willing to take their chances on being able to get a prodigy that can come in, that can lift them
right.
out of the
But the thing
there.
too, Rick, and again, I go back to what I said, is that if that prodigy takes my job, that's a different story. So yeah, I think the problem with any tournament like that is it just, for players, it de-incentivizes them. And that's not going to solve tanking. You're still going to see tanking in the tournament. Some teams are just not going to bother. And if I was a player, why would I play in it?
And
I'm
teams are just
risking my job.
Teams are
on
going
an off chance that my team gets better.
Teams are going to tank the tournament. Like, give me that number 11 pick.
I
want the 11.
Accept tank.
I want the 11th pick in this year's draft.
Yeah.
Is anybody going to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm just saying too, if I'm a team, I'm not. The owners are incentivized, but the players are not. So I don't.
Well, the coaches,
that's gonna be
the
that's
GM.
going to be the thing we're going to run into essentially.
Okay.
And I heard
Okay.
there's also rumors of like not necessarily a tournament, but maybe the top 4 teams play a mini tournament to determine the top 4 picks, maybe. And I get that as well. It's just I don't think any sport is healthy in a scenario where you're forcing guys to play and potentially lose their jobs. I don't know if the Player Association will be very happy about that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just not. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it has to be something more archaic than a tournament because I don't think anyone's really going to care as much. Like there will be teams that will definitely try to go for it, but I also feel like there's going to be a handful of teams like, look, we're going to be too good anyway. It doesn't really matter if we win this tournament or not.
Yeah. Well, they're going to have
It's
to
tough. There's no perfect system, I would like to say. So
yeah,
I think the simplest, and again too, is like the fines that were levied to Utah and Indiana are not big amounts of money to these owners. So it's really just more for finding the and again too, I've always think tanking, match fixing, all these things are going to exist no matter what. It's just part of our world.
Yeah.
The only thing I think what they can do is you have to incentivize teams more in terms of the lottery odds and in terms of like making sure that teams are not intentionally throwing games. Because I think it got to the point where when Utah rested Jaren Jackson Jr. and Markkanen in back-to-back fourth quarters, that's when I think a lot of us were like, this is a little egregious now. This is not like resting your guys for one day. It's more like you're essentially taking out your best players in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole thing too. And you go back over a period of time, the aforementioned Derek Lively, is that not how he was obtained by
Correct.
Dallas? Yeah. That like that it was, they had a chance to be in the play-in tournament. They were like, thanks, but no thanks. And it's a thing where it was the smart thing to do objectively.
Right. And I'll say this rule too, is like, I'm on a different side of the fence. I'm not against tanking. It just happens. Yeah. We have to do that. But there also has to be some protection in a way to where teams are not intentionally like making it obvious that they're throwing games. Because we've seen it multiple times this season where whole starting lineups will rest.
Yeah.
And you can't really do that. And at some point, you have to do something to at least keep competitive balance. But I think in all sports, it's a commonality that happens more. It also, to be fair, Rick, if I'm being honest, it felt more like this was the flavor of the month sort of thing. Like, this is the month we're going to talk about tanking.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately changes will be made. And obviously, I think the league under Adam Silver is probably going to take a more holistic approach and try and keep things simple.
Yeah.
Because I know the Players Association is not going to exactly be happy if they have to play games to determine draft picks.
Right.
I don't think they'll. I think it's a great way to fix the system, but I don't know if the Players Association will go along with that.
It depends, and it depends what their degree of dissatisfaction is with the status quo, and that's something we don't hear as much about. We hear about it on the league level and with some of the teams also too, and teams that are in the playoff picture that see another team basically throwing a game and helping out one of their opponents in the standings here. So we don't hear nearly as much about how aggrieved the players are. I'll maintain again, I think the players in New Orleans and Washington and whatever are so desperate that they'd try anything. But then, what does that do across the rest of the league? We don't really know because we don't hear as much about what the players are saying. And the players' voice in this, you are right about that, I think unquestionably. It will have a lot to do with whatever the ending outcome may be. But it's a thing where, looking at this in the calendar year 2025, the way that things went in the NBA, I mean, it does seem like even with, the earthquake of the Harden move at the deadline here, all of the bizarre talk about where Giannis might end up going to turns out to be nowhere. Like, in a way, it does seem like when the calendar flipped to 2026, and it's still new yet, but like it feels like it's more of a normal NBA type year than the end of last season did, the second half and maybe the first half of this season, and certainly the off season. Does it feel like we've got a little bit more normality back in the league at this point?
I kind of feel so, yeah. And I
Okay.
agree. And again, I know tanking is going to be a question, and they're going to look at the league's going to continue to look at it. But I ultimately feel like, again, we live in a 24/7, 365 media culture. That was the thing that everyone was irritated about at that time. So it will spark some change, and then you'll start to see more in terms of planning. But again, I do feel like the league has kind of it's still healthier than it's ever been. And I think so far this season, outside of like tanking, well, all-star attendance numbers, it's been, if those are the two things you're most worried about, that's usually a good sign for the health of the league.
Yes, and people have been talking about the great influx of young players in the league the last couple of years, and as you pointed out, something to look forward to going even past this season in whatever order. AJ Debinsa, Darren Peterson, and Boozer Jr. With them coming into the NBA next year, and how is that going to play out in the different situations here? And if they can provide anywhere close to the impact that this year's top rookies have been, it will be really, really even more exciting in the NBA. But always great to do one of these segments here, Ben. Look forward to catching up with you as the season progresses. Thank you so much for being here today, my man.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.
Thanks, bud. Always appreciated to have you on. And thank you, everybody, for checking out FDH Lounge mini episode 1907.